Washington, D.C., I'm VIktorija Rinkeviciute.
The report says airlines should be ordered to allow passengers to check at least one baggage for free.
Because they managed to raise more than
It's just a couple of hours before the last deadline for politicians to strike the deal on the budget, yet there is still no news from the Congress. If the government shuts down tomorrow, about 500,000 people will be turned away from the Smithsonian museums and the National Zoo.
Metro says closing early would save almost $5 million a year. It would also give Metro more than a month and a half to do needed construction. Chocolate is melting in a so-called chocolate city. Some say from now on Washington, D.C. should be called a vanilla swirl city. But experts say with rising populations of white and Hispanics across the country, nicknames may no longer carry the meaning. Soon, everybody in America will be a minority. Last year, 500,000 people visited Smithsonian museums during this weekend. But today, buses line up and crowds of tourists hurry to museums because they are afraid all will be closed tomorrow due to a possible government shutdown. Quintero family from Bogota spent $2,500 just for plane tickets to Washington. With the possible government shutdown, they say it was a waste. The family has no plans of coming back to D.C.
We don't have the time, we don't have the money. We are on the spring break and with the girls.
Lindsay Fish and her son rushed to Air and Space Museum from Baltimore to prepare for his 4th space birthday.
This was one of our choices, but we chose this over doing one of our activities in Baltimore because we knew we might not have the opportunity.
Those who came to Washington in the middle of the week managed to see the main landmarks of the capital. Now they're shortening their stay.
We'll probably leave tomorrow because of the closure. Otherwise, we would have stayed 2 more days.
Those who just arrived can't hide their disappointment.
I brought my family here, especially my daughter up here from Houston, because I want to show her how government works. What it looks like is I'm showing her how government doesn't work.
It's just a couple of hours before the last deadline for politicians to strike the deal on the budget, yet there is still no news from the Congress. If the government shuts down tomorrow, about 500,000 people will be turned away from the Smithsonian museums and the National Zoo. From Washington, D.C., I'm VIktorija Rinkeviciute. The escalators at this Stanleytown Metro station might stop running in autumn. Metro is thinking of closing its doors at midnight on weekends to save money. Kunle Felix Sola, a chef at a fast food restaurant, is one of thousands Metro customers who would be affected by this decision. On weekends, Felix finishes work at 2 a.m.
If the Metro, the last train close early, there's no way I can get home because most of the buses doesn't run.
The only way for Felix to get back home to New Carlton would be to take a taxi. One ride would cost him $60. But he says the problem is not only the money, it's getting a cab to Maryland.
Most of them, they don't know the way, or maybe they're scared, or so for some reason, I find it very difficult to get a taxi over.
Metro says the idea of closing early on weekends is one of options to balance the budget. Metro's on the red by $72 million.
Metro says closing early would save almost $5 million a year. It would also give Metro more than a month and a half to do needed construction.
We are operating a rail system, a subway system that is 35 years old next month. The system is not getting any newer, it is getting older. Our rails are taking a beating day in and day out.
Back at Z-Burger, Felix's co-workers are also worried. Manager Magdad Sayed Mohammed says about 20 of his employees depend on Metro's late-night service to come back home. He says if worst comes to worst, the restaurant will have to rearrange the schedule and give closing shift to those with cars. But it might not be enough.
We have a specific people for closing, and It's hard to find people for at that time of the night work.
Together with Felix, more than 13,000 people use the weekend nightly service. Metro says before the final decision will be taken in spring, they'll hold a public hearing on the issue. From Washington, D.C., I'm VIktorija Rinkeviciute. The White House, Washington Monument, and Lincoln Memorial. These touristic landmarks of Washington, D.C. are nowhere to move. But nation's capital is losing one of its symbols. The recent census data shows about 1/10 of African Americans moved out of D.C. in the last decade.
The house price increases made it harder for people of lower incomes to stay in the city.
Urban historian Blair Rubel says U Street, Foggy Bottom, Georgetown, and DuPont Circle were predominantly black neighborhoods. He says the white and black areas formed centuries ago.
African Americans were on plantations on the flatlands that are to the east of Washington, and free farmers and whites were on the highlands to the west, and that line more or less still holds up.
Richard Malone cooks lunch in his house just at the border, 16th and Nicholson Streets by Rock Creek Park. His parents moved here in the 60s. He says it was an African-American neighborhood blocks and blocks around.
There's no one still here. We're the last, basically, me and Horace Holmes, the gentleman down the street, are the last ones from that era.
Experts name a number of reasons why D.C. is losing its African-American population. The city doesn't create jobs for an average black family. They also say whites usually have more of inherited wealth, whereas blacks are selling the property they passed along generations to make the ends meet.
Sell it for $400,000. If they have 4 kids, we get $100,000 apiece. And therefore they do that, and they can go out to PG County, and they can buy a house at a reasonable price, have some yard space, and not have to pay for the tuition for their kids.
Richard Malone says the tradition to live in your parents' house is what created the Chocolate City. After he's gone, he says his son will continue cooking lunch in this same kitchen. Chocolate is melting in a so-called Chocolate City. Some say from now on Washington, D.C. should be called a Vanilla Swirl City. But experts say with rising populations of white and Hispanics across the country, nicknames may no longer carry the meaning. Soon, everybody in America will be a minority. From Washington, D.C., I'm VIktorija Rinkeviciute. Tenley campus neighbors have made a suggestion to you about contract that would guarantee the university would not expand to the residential area. David Taylor, Chief of Staff to American University President Neil Kerwin, welcome to the program.
Thank you.
So, would American University actually consider this suggestion of the Tenley campus neighbors to actually for you sign the contract not to expand to the residential area?
Well, that perhaps is based on a misconception. We're not planning to expand beyond the confines of the Tenley campus on that particular parcel. So that is really not an issue for us.
Well, I've been talking to Ms. Mayor before, and she told me that like 10 years ago this has been an issue. We can listen to what she has to say.
The university bought this property in 1986, and they signed an agreement at that time that would cap not move the law school and cap the enrollment at 450 students. And that was okay for a short amount of time. There was, in the written agreement, there was not a cutoff date. But it turns out that AU never intended to view that as a long-term commitment.
So, Mr. Taylor, is American University not keeping its promises?
No, that is incorrect. The Zoning Commission has every 10 years a process where universities indeed can go before them and discuss any plans for expansion, any plans for growth. So it is an every 10-year process. So that is indeed the process that we observe. So every 10 years these questions rise again.
So can you make this promise that in 10 years you won't be expanding further?
No, I cannot. In 10 years we indeed will go through another campus planning process as is required by the district government.
From Egypt to Libya, the Middle East has seen pro-democracy demonstrations and violence for weeks. Jeremy Borden is live here in the studio with more. Jeremy? Radiation levels in Japan's damaged nuclear plant are still too dangerous for workers to go inside. Robots sent into the plant show radiation has spiked in the last few days. TEPCO, which owns the plant, has laid out a 9-month plan to completely shut it down. Thousands in Japan have been evacuated from their homes after last month's earthquake and tsunami. The Federal Aviation Administration is suspending a Never air traffic controller and a manager. The FAA says the Cleveland controller was watching a DVD while working, and his microphone was accidentally transmitting the movie soundtrack for more than 3 minutes. It happened on the same day the FAA released stricter rules and regulations for air traffic controllers. The suspension comes after 8 instances this year when controllers were sleeping on the job or didn't respond while on duty. Alexandria is now one of the 12 distinctive destinations for the year. The city was nominated for its charm and is in the running for the fan favorite competition. Brianna Redondo has the story. Kelsey, it's a shame to admit, but I haven't been to Alexandria. Do you have any places for me to recommend for the weekend?
You know, I usually do go there on the weekends. There's this great bookstore and it's a really nice coffee shop.